Hello and welcome to Hysteria. I'm Erin Ryan.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco.
Alyssa, who would strike the most fear in your heart if they showed up at your house unannounced?
Katie Porter.
Okay, no. I have a list.
Okay, go ahead.
You get to pick. And then you can offer a freestyle suggestion. New York Attorney General Tish James, option 1. Ronan Farrow, option 2. Or the Weather Channel's Jim Cantore with a camera crew.
I think Tish. I think Tish James. I think that's the correct answer. All of your options, I would need to know if I was a target or a witness.
Well, if you're Jim Cantore's witness, that's not great either.
No. None of your options are good.
I would probably say Tish. I would be like, what are you doing in Los Angeles? This must be serious. Oh my gosh. Okay. So as our listeners know, we talk about this all the time. The states are where the heat is when it comes to abortion rights. The states are where the important battles are taking place. Some people would call it state by state chaos that was unleashed by the Dobbs decision. And some would say that that people were warned that this would happen. And we would say that the people who were warning you were right because we were among them. But we're going to give you a quick update of some of the developments in some states. So Pennsylvania is actually a low-key next battleground for abortion rights. So there is an important election this November in the Keystone State. A seat on the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court is up for grabs in November. And a Democrat who's vowed to protect women's reproductive rights is running against a Republican who promised to defend all life under the law. All life, you say. Interesting.
What life, Erin?
You
what
mean
life?
like the
all
lives
life?
all life? You mean like the lives of adults who don't want to get shot by guns? You mean like children?
Not that life.
What about like poor people who want access to health care?
Oh, not that life either.
What about like endangered species that are being eradicated because of pollution and human irresponsible
Erin, they want to mount those guys on their walls.
Oh. That's weird. All is a strange choice of words.
It's just a little. It's a smidge.
Yeah, it's a little fucking weasels. Okay, so the control of the state Supreme Court isn't at stake in Pennsylvania, but in 2025, there are 3 Democrats on the court that are up for re-election. So that's going to be a huge year, and it's strategically very important for a Democrat to win that seat in the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court this year to preserve abortion access for the long term for people in the state. A lot of money is going to be spent on this race.
Yep.
Democrats are feeling pretty good about their chances after the shellacking in Wisconsin, Ohio, Kansas, and all of the elections where abortion has been a winning issue. So a lot of money is going to be spent on this race. We will be paying attention to it. And although it is not as like immediately dire as the Wisconsin race, it is super, super important. So check back with us periodically. We will update you on that.
And Erin? August fuckery, it's still August, and the Republicans aren't done. Ohio, a couple weeks ago, we talked about issue 1 that was on the ballot. Well, abortion rights supporters in Ohio are now suing state officials over ballot language they approved for a proposed constitutional amendment that would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution. Erin, Ohio officials added the term, quote, unborn child in what is the latest front in the ongoing effort to protect abortion access in the state. The lawsuit from Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights and 5 voters was filed Monday after the 5-member Ohio Ballot Board adopted new language for the ballot measure that will be before voters in the November general election. So, Erin, here's where we are. The citizen-initiated amendment known as Issue 1 would establish, quote, the right to reproductive freedom with protections for health and safety. What is the shady board doing? The board adopted language drafted by GOP Secretary of State Frank LaRose states that under the proposal, Ohio citizens are barred from, quote, burdening, penalizing, or prohibiting abortion before an unborn child is determined to be viable. The proposed amendment would allow Ohio citizens to prohibit an abortion after an unborn child is determined by a pregnant woman's treating physician to be viable. Now, Erin,
okay, that's not what the fucking, that's not what the ballot, that's not what it does. That's not what it does.
What it does. And using the term unborn child, which doesn't appear in the amendment, introduces an ethical judgment at what stage of development a zygote, embryo, or fetus becomes a child, which is outside the proposal scope.
And also the proposal is meant to preserve miscarriage care and preserve access to contraception, which are things that in states that have really draconian anti-abortion laws are actually endangered. Like we're seeing it happen in Texas. People are not able to access miscarriage care. And like also, I hate the phrase unborn child. I hate the phrase unborn child. Can we call Secretary of State Frank LaRose an undead skeleton? Like, can we call him that? Is that okay? I mean, it doesn't describe reality. It's a pregnancy. So I think that the abortion rights advocates are totally right to challenge the language because that is not what the amendment to the state constitution says.
They're subverting the will of the people. The people voted. They voted like this is just what is so hypocritical about the GOP, Erin. Like, there was an election. They tried to bury it in the middle of fucking summer. And guess what? Voters still turned out en masse. So just fucking stop.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully this will Streisand affect this amendment into the Constitution because I don't think Ohio voters are stupid. I think Ohio voters are really annoyed by their state representatives and their state government trying to pull one over on them and treat them like they are stupid. I think
they're paying attention. I think that the GOP hates it because they're paying attention.
Exactly. And I think that they don't understand the power of the fuck you vote. And that's like what happened in August in Ohio. It was a fuck you vote. And they're setting themselves up, the GOP, for another fuck you vote in November. So we'll see. We'll keep you up to speed on what happens there as well. All right. And on to Michigan. Wow, Alyssa, it's rare that I get to be the deliverer of the good news.
Yeah. Take it away.
This week I get the good news. Big Gretch is showing the rest of the country how it's done. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer on Wednesday endorsed legislative measures seeking to undo current Michigan regulations on abortion. Now, the current regulations have, it's a waiting period, 24-hour waiting period. And it also requires a woman to attest she has received various educational materials and fetal development illustrations, which is pretty yuck. Like, women know what pregnancy is. We don't need a drawing. We don't.
But is there any other medical procedure? We're given diagrams to go home and study before we can have the procedure.
I mean, like, what if before you had a colonoscopy, you had to look at like a bunch of pictures of butts, or like a bunch of pictures of colonoscopies? Like,
no, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like, medical procedures are disgusting. All of them.
Right. A whole smattering of them are absolutely fucking gross.
Even like pimple popping is disgusting. Every medical procedure is gross. And I think most people going in to receive a medical procedure know what the medical procedure is. Like, it's the waiting periods and informed consent laws are so, they're so ridiculously condescending to
That's
women.
the exact right word.
And it sucks. And Governor Whitmer is absolutely right to take a blowtorch to those things. She wants also for everybody to be able to access abortion care, regardless of where they live, work, or what type of insurance they have. So she's really coming out swinging. She's coming out showing what can happen when you have a red state that has flipped blue. And we couldn't be prouder of her. We're big fans of Big Gretch.
Has some power, and she's taking it out for a spin.
I suggest other governors do the same. And some really are. I gotta say.
Some are. And she's leading the way.
She is absolutely leading the way. Oh, boy. One final story in this kind of abortion bucket, if you will. Man, we found this in the New York Times on Wednesday. There's a piece that highlights some weaseliness on the part of the
Weasel
GOP.
Is the only word for these weasels.
Absolute weasels. A bunch of Republican congresswomen who have vulnerable 2024 seats are pretending to care about women's health just enough to get reelected, but not enough to actually help anybody, aka the GOP sweet spot. pretend to care enough to convince enough people to get you into office, and then do nothing. The toothless, meaningless, hilariously titled legislation. Can I read it? Can you read it?
Please, let me read it.
Okay.
The Orally Taken Contraception Act of 2023, Erin, is that the one you're talking about? Is that the one you're talking about?
I mean, I know I sound like Beavis and or Butthead right now, but like Orally Taken Contraception Act of 2023 sounds like a joke about blowjobs, but it is sponsored. It is sponsored by Marionette Miller Meeks, which is the real name of a person who represents Iowa in the House of Representatives. She won her race in 2022 by 6 votes. 6.
Oh,
0
you think
6.
She's feeling a little pinch? You think she's a little nervous?
She is shit scared about getting voted out in 2024. So basically, the bill doesn't do anything. It is first of all, it specifies oral contraceptives, which are not as effective as other contraceptives.
Lots of others.
Yes, there's like longer term contraceptives too, like IUDs. Big fan of IUDs. They don't work for everybody, but if they do work for you, they're a great option. NuvaRing, which is another great option for a lot of people. The shot, the implant, there's all kinds of contraceptives that are more effective than oral contraception. But Republicans are trying to present being pro over-the-counter birth control pills is akin to supporting women's health. Now, Alyssa, do you think that this is like real? Like, does this help anybody?
What I think, Erin, is that this is in response to a Pew poll that showed in states where abortion is now prohibited, 43% of voters say abortion access should be easier, up from 31% in 2019. These are some hypocritical bitches just being hypocritical. They're like, look over here at the shiny object. Birth control, everybody. We're not awful. You are awful. You're absolutely awful.
You're absolutely awful.
You're not helping anybody.
I wanted to read one excerpt from this because it's so egregious Philbin. Which is my cutesy name for fucking evil. The headline, Republican women fearing backlash on abortion pivot to birth control. But the article in the New York Times, to its credit, has shown, it really does a good job of highlighting the hypocrisy of the people who are supporting it. Joining Ms. Miller, this is from the article. Joining Ms. Miller Meeks on the legislation was Representative Jen Kiggins, Republican of Virginia, a top target of Democrats in next year's elections. Ms. Kiggins, a nurse practitioner, voted with her party in July to attach language to the annual defense policy bill that would reverse a Pentagon policy aimed at preserving access to abortion services for military personnel, regardless of where they're stationed, and has spent the weeks since emphasizing her advocacy for expanding access to contraception. In addition to co-sponsoring the birth control bill, Ms. Kiggins supported an amendment to the defense measure by Representative Veronica Escobar of Texas, a Democrat, to eliminate copays for contraception for military members and their families. That's good, right? But a lot of these people are like Susan B. Anthony List is supporting this. Susan B. Anthony List.
Sus.
Super sus. And only two drug companies exist that are actually actively trying to offer OTC birth control. One of them is already approved for over-the-counter sale without a prescription before the legislation. And the other one has already been applying to get over-the-counter approval from the FDA. So what this bill does is literally nothing.
Nada.
Literally nothing.
Literally.
So yeah, it's pretty stupid. Okay, let's go on to what other stories do we have?
Well, Erin, it's the end of August, almost Labor Day. School is starting up. In some places, the classroom has changed a bit since the last time students were there, and it's impacting them as well as education professionals. Erin, in Indiana, Governor Holcomb signed a bill that does not allow grade schools to discuss anything about gender and sexuality until 4th grade. The bill also forces school faculty and staff to out students to their parents or guardians if they start going by a different name or using different pronouns at school. Erin,
that's awful.
What are they doing? What are they trying to accomplish? You know what? It's like, do you back, when there were discussions about parental notification for abortions for women under 18? You know what? If someone has a good relationship with their parents, they're going to tell them. And if they're not going to tell them, there's probably a reason. And that's kind of how I feel about this. So why are they trying to back young kids into a corner? It's so bad. And we have a story from one of our listeners, an assistant principal in a rural Indiana school district who has been impacted by this bill. From our listener, I haven't experienced such a strong ethical, moral dilemma since the beginning of my administration role 10 years ago. Due to Indiana House Bill 1608, I was directed to have conversations with my students. Although we aren't required to speak with students about the letters that will be coming to their mailboxes this week, informing parents their child has requested to go by a different name or use different pronouns, our school leadership knew this was the right thing to do. A district tasked with high poverty rates and questionable family units at their homes, I made sure my students would be safe. Out of the 8 students I had conversations with, 2 shed tears. One asked to send the letter to one parent and not the other, and the other may at this moment be coming out to his parents. Erin, this was a requested fuck that guy, and we are happy to do it. Erin, do you want to do the honors?
Yeah. Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb, who signed House Bill 1608, and Representative Michelle Davis, who authored the bill. Fuck those guys.
Fuck those guys.
Representative Jake Teshka, Representative Chris Jeter, Representative Robert Heaton, Senator Stacey Donato, Senator Jeff Rates. I'm going to call him Jeff Rats.
Who cares?
And Senator Gary Byrne. Fuck those fucking guys. You are endangering kids' lives. Also, I'm going to say, if you're a kid in Indiana, this is just a wild pitch. Can we I am Spartacus this? Can we all decide, can the kids all tell their teachers as a form of protest they're all going by different names and changing their pronouns? I think that'd probably be a good way to show solidarity to your trans classmates, and also gum up the system with a bunch of administrative work and phone calls. I mean, who are they to tell you whether or not...
It's a K-pop tactic, and we're into it. Yes.
Come on. Be like the K-pop stans, Indiana students, and I am Spartacus, this ridiculous and awful legislation. In California's Chino Valley School District is being sued by State Attorney General Rob Bonta because our state government, for the most part, in many ways, is on the right side of this issue. Chino Valley Unified School District adopted a policy similar to Indiana's, and Rob Bonta is like, no, bitch, you can't do that. Please do not do that. That is awful. Bonta filed a lawsuit on Monday to stop that school district from outing trans students to their parents, arguing that doing that does violate constitutional rights and could cause students mental, emotional, psychological, and potential physical harm. He's right. So hopefully Bonta comes out on top of it. Chino Valley isn't the only California school district that has tried to do something like this. Religious conservatives have targeted the school board there in order to try to, I don't know, they're so concerned about messing with kids. Yeah. They cannot fucking leave kids alone. And it is deeply creepy.
So creepy.
Deeply, deeply creepy. A lot of the people that are messing with school boards in these elections, by the way, don't have kids in the district. They're just freelance, insane people. Yeah. It's wild. So hopefully Bonta prevails. We will keep you up to speed. Alyssa, a positive note. Let's end the news on a positive note.
Erin, here on Hysteria, we are so grateful for the teachers doing the hard work, the ones who support their kids unconditionally and do everything they can to empower their kids. Because of that, we wanted to plug Clear the List, an initiative dedicated to helping teachers get the school supplies on their Amazon wish list. They really, really need the stuff they're asking for, especially since schools and governments can only provide the teachers with so much. Please donate art supplies and books and all things. We'll include the link in our show notes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have an interview with Shannon Watts. While it's never under the best of circumstances, we are always thankful to have the insight and intelligence of our next guest on this podcast. She's a speaker and author, founder of Moms Demand Action, and her fierceness in fighting for gun safety is endlessly inspiring. Shannon Watts, welcome to Hysteria.
Thanks for having me.
Shannon, so here we are again. Here you are again. Here we are again. And even in a country that sees mass shootings with regularity, there's been a recent and tragic uptick in them, from Jacksonville to the universities of both North and South Carolina. Because shootings are so common, our cultural and political reaction is tepid at best. What's your reaction to this latest round of awful gun crimes?
You know, it's not just this uptick in mass shootings, right? We know school shootings and mass shootings are around 1% of the gun violence in this country. The everyday gun violence that kills over 120 people in America, wounds over 200 more, mostly with handguns. It disproportionately impacts Black and Brown Americans. That's the gun violence that often doesn't make the headlines. It's the mass shootings that do. And the other thing that we're seeing an uptick in is hate crimes, and they're being carried out with guns. You know, I wrote a piece talking about white women coming to the gun violence prevention movement a week after a white woman who was an LGBTQ ally, was shot to death for hanging a pride flag outside a clothing store she owned. I wrote that piece one day before a radicalized white supremacist young man took a gun and shot and killed 3 Black people who were just going about their day and trying to shop at a grocery store. So this is something I think that really we need to talk about, right? It's not just the mass shootings. We have to care about all the gun violence that is happening in this country.
Shannon, let's talk about your post that you put in your newsletter, Playing with Fire. You talk about the importance of white women's role in the gun safety movement. How historically have white women been in this fight, and where should they be?
You know, I went to Substack because I wanted to be able to talk about some of the things that I talk about in places like Twitter, but in long form. My Twitter feed is now just full of trolls and racists and extremists and misogynists and bigots. And so Substack has given me this way to communicate ideas that I've been thinking about for over a decade. And to be clear, I am a white woman who came to this space because I was afraid my kids weren't safe in their school back in 2012 after the horrific Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy. And I was privileged and uneducated and living in a bubble that was formed in many ways by systemic racism. And so I've had sort of a front row seat to what happens with white women and their political power after these shootings. And so often it is misguided. And I understand that. I have a true, I don't know if empathy is the right word, but I have an understanding of it. And I've learned a lot. And what I want to do is say to other white women, you can do this in a way that does no harm. We're glad you're finally here. It's so important. We need you in this fight, but not for the reasons you think. I think white women come to this fight and think, this sort of the savior complex, right? I'm here. I'm going to create a new organization where I live. I'm going to call for an assault weapons ban, and I'm going to do this with other white women. And I'm not saying all of that is cognizant or conscious, but that is what they often end up doing. And I've seen it again and again and again. And I think it is my role, and I know there are other Moms Demand Action volunteers who feel the same way, which is to say to these white women, think about the solutions you're proposing. Think about the people you're partnering with. Think about how you're coming into this space, because you can make a real difference, not because you believe you can change the hearts and minds of extremist white men that you frankly voted into office in the first place. It's because you can use your political power for good and stand shoulder to shoulder with the Black women who have been on the right side of this issue, who have been victims of this issue for so long.
You mentioned having a lot of misogynist attacks in your mentions and on social media and in comments and in however they can communicate with you, they're communicating misogyny. And there is a link between misogyny and gun violence. Men are almost all of the mass shooters, and men are almost all of the legislators that are not doing anything about the mass shooting. How do we fix men? How do we fix them?
It's a very big and complicated question. Let's talk first about the men who are becoming gunmen. A lot of these men are being radicalized online. And again, this is an important role I think we play as white women. We are raising these men too often. We are not watching for the spaces they're in. We are not educating them about the bubbles they're being raised in. I get really tired of hearing how lonely and disenfranchised young white men are. I have a 22-year-old white son, and he tells me all the time that he goes on YouTube. He's, brought down into this rabbit hole of extremism and white supremacy, and right-wing rhetoric. As moms, we have to be watching out for that. And we have to make sure that we're supporting gun safety laws, because every peer nation is home to troubled, racist young men. Only America gives them arsenals and ammunition. The other question you asked, I think, is an important one, which is about what about these lawmakers, over 80% of whom are men, and most of them are white men. This idea that we can somehow cajole extremists into supporting our viewpoints and our families and our communities, I hope that has been put to bed by what we saw happen in Tennessee. All of these white women showed up because they were upset about a shooting at a conservative, affluent Christian school. What did the white male lawmakers do who were in charge? They forcibly dragged them out of committee hearings because they held up signs protesting their inaction. The patriarchy is coming for you, even if you are a white woman. And it is incumbent on us to stop thinking that simply cozying up to them or begging them or praying with them is going to make a change. The only thing, and I know this firsthand because I've been doing this work now for almost 11 years, the only thing that will change their hearts and minds is political pragmatism. They have to see people losing their jobs. Mm-hmm. If you want Republicans to be on the right side of this issue, they will only do it because they're afraid of the consequences of that. If you go back to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that passed at a federal level after the shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, I never thought that would pass. But what happened? Mitch McConnell got polling that showed there would be consequences for Republicans in the midterm elections if they didn't support it. 15 Republicans voted for it. It wasn't because they saw photos of children's dead bodies. It wasn't because beautiful white women came to their offices and cried. It wasn't because they suddenly realized that their laws were killing kids. It was because they were afraid they would lose their jobs. And that is why white women have to be allies to black women, because the only way we vote them out of office is to use our collective voices and votes. Mm-hmm.
So throw all the men out, basically. Throw the men out.
Throw the men out of office. Women hold less than 25% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. When you don't have a seat at the table, you are on the menu.
Shannon, with every new shooting, we hear the GOP talk about mental health. Are there any states with lax gun ownership criteria actually making meaningful strides to address the mental health crisis that they're talking about, or is this all just a bait and switch?
Oh, there's a straw man every single time there's a shooting tragedy. If it's not mental illness, it is video games or divorce or SSRIs, too many exit doors, not enough exit doors. There's always a reason for a gun violence tragedy in this country for Republicans, except the guns. As I mentioned, peer nations have the same problems that we do, including mental illness. And yet we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate. We know it is easy access to guns. The data shows us it's easy access to guns. And to your point, Republicans, point fingers at mental illness, and yet they're the same governors who are cutting their budgets for mental illness support. Governor Ron DeSantis would not accept millions in federal dollars from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to bolster the state's red flag law. There are always red flags before these shooting tragedies, including this white supremacist who killed 3 Black people last weekend. There are always red flags. So these laws need to be robust and they need to be implemented and they need to be incentivized. And yet Republicans are doing the opposite.
Shannon, our podcast is a news source for some of our listeners. What tips do you have for people like us who want to cover gun violence, talk about it publicly? How do we do that consistently and productively?
I think we have to make sure we're not just talking about it after mass shooting tragedies. I think that we have to encourage people to get involved and to understand that, especially as white women, we have an obligation to be activists. We cannot sit on the sidelines simply until we are afraid our own children or families are at risk. We have to find a piece of the work that we're passionate about. We have to take it on. You can join Moms Demand Action. There are plenty of groups in your area. Something, as you can imagine, not all white women are super excited about my talking points on this issue. And they're saying things like, well, we show up at the State House with such and such Black women's organization. That's not enough. Don't ask Black women to come to your events in your community. Go to theirs. Go to their rallies and marches. Sit with them in courthouses. Ask them what they need and then follow through. I wrote robustly about this in my Substack and on Playing with Fire. I hope people will read the whole thing. But I do think we should be talking about this and not just after a mass shooting tragedy, throughout the year. Policy will be made in November when we go to the polls. It's not made, after a mass shooting tragedy necessarily. So this is a year-long process. We need people to show up. We need them to stay engaged, and we need them to fight for the accurate and correct solutions. And that's the last thing I'll say on this, which is, after a mass shooting tragedy, a lot of white women call for an assault weapons ban. That's fine. Yes, we need an assault weapons ban, but that is not what is going to save the most amount of lives. That is not what is going to stop the handgun violence that is disproportionately impacting Black and brown kids. So I would also just say to look at this holistically.
Shannon Watts, thank you so much for joining us again. We wish it were under better circumstances. Listeners, you can read more of Shannon's words on Playing with Fire, her Substack, which we highly recommend everyone subscribe to.